Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to Innovate Sac. Thank you so much for coming out today during Global Entrepreneurship Week. Really excited to have you here. I'm Monique Brown. I am Director of Partner Relations at IO Labs and at the Sacramento iHub, which is a regional network of stakeholders from the university, government, and business sectors that come together every month, working to build an innovation ecosystem here in Sacramento. So if you haven't heard of us or would like to know more, come talk to me afterwards, and I can certainly tell you about that. So I hope you had a chance to connect and learn more already about the innovative work that's going on in our region already in the various verticals here. Now we're going to invite some speakers up to the stage to give you a glimpse into the future. We're going to be talking about how disruptive technologies from many of the same verticals represented here will be shaping tomorrow's business, society, and culture. And we're going to hear from the City of Sacramento regarding their vision for an Urban Technology Lab framework that can build on the great work that's already being done in Sacramento and help us to participate in and benefit from the creation and testing and deployment of the disruptive technologies on the horizon. So let's kick it off. We are excited to be here today at Sac State, as the university is crucial in developing the Sacramento's innovation ecosystem. Innovation and entrepreneurship is alive and well here at Sacramento State, where the College of Business Administration graduates can be found in key positions in large and small businesses across the region. It is also encouraged in every college and academic program on campus. From computer science to health science to social sciences, innovation is fostered and cultivated. We are excited to have Dr. Robert Nelson with us today to welcome us on behalf of the university. Dr. Nelson is Sac State's 8th president and will share with us some information on a historic announcement that was made in this room earlier this week. Dr. Nelson?
Well, if you haven't heard what happened here this week, then you've been under a rock. We announced a $6 million gift to the university from Dale and Katie Carlson. To create a center for innovation, and please note, innovation comes first, and entrepreneurship. This is something that Dale has been thinking about for many years. You know, he started with one mattress in the back of a pickup. And then he went on and on and on until he had 312 stores, of which the workers owned 25%. That's disruptive. When he sold those stores, $117 million went back to those workers. Truly innovative in what he was trying to do, truly innovative in what he did on the side also. He brought the Ticket to Dream Foundation. This is entrepreneurship, okay? He decided that people had to get involved and want to be involved and wanted to go to that mattress store because you know, they were raising the prices of mattresses from $100 to $5,000, right? So how are you going to make this loyalty? You're going to find a cause. He found foster children. And he went to the company that would make the mattresses and said, give me 10 mattresses. I'll pay for it, what it costs to build them, but just give me 10. And you know, we'll give them to kids and they'll have beds. Well, he only had 2 stores then. Now they've got 3,000 stores getting free beds. Completely disrupting what's going on. This new center will be for everyone in this room and for our students. It will be over in the library on the floor 1.5 okay? 14,000 square feet. It will help with business plans. It will help with generating new companies, incubating new companies, and really centering on innovation. Sacramento is a wonderful place. Just think about the ecosystem you're talking about today. Just look at the entrepreneurs that are sitting next to you. Just look at the combination of people that are out there. Our future is bright if we scale up. If it's just going to be one little center, or 4 centers, or 5 centers, we're going nowhere. We have to scale up and all come together to create a new economy here. I love Valley Vision, and I love the idea of the next economy, but we're even going beyond 3.0 and all the way to making true changes. Sac State wants to be your partner. That's why we invited you here today. We want to be Lewis's partner. He'll speak to you in a little while about the city and getting the city involved. The mayor will be here. He'll talk about that. Let's do it together, okay? And you'll all think this is weird, but my students don't.
Sac State and Sacramento are #1. Stingers up!
Okay, that was pretty awesome. Thank you so much. So, and echoing that message of doing this together, it's so great to see so many people in this room, and really the conversations this year that I've been hearing is really about a desire to communicate with each other, really to come together to find ways to collaborate across university, business, and government entities to support our startups in the ecosystem that we're building here. And this is just so encouraging to have Sac State stepping up in this way and becoming, really a leader in this space. So thank you very much. So next, someone who needs really no introduction, Mayor Steinberg is the Mayor of Sacramento, and we're welcoming you to the stage now. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope that I didn't hold you up. I heard a loud, booming voice of President Nelson with his usual enthusiasm for this great university, for our community, and for all the great things that are happening here. And this is, I think, the second time I've had the opportunity to speak at the Global Entrepreneurship Week. And I think last year, I was not yet mayor. I think I was mayor-elect, right? Because I was sworn in on December 13th of 2016, and my, how time flies. Feels like, after last night's city council meeting, I feel like I've been on the job about 12 years. But it's not quite the case. And I don't remember exactly what I spoke about last year, but I remember the basic theme. The basic theme that was that when I look at the arc of my own public service career and opportunities, that I've entered leadership at distinct periods of time, over time. That in 2008, when my colleagues elected me to be the head of the state senate, I like to say I drew the short straw, I think, because it was the beginning of the worst recession in modern state history. That chapter of my own service was marked by some unique challenges. It was not a bad experience. In fact, it was a very rich experience, but it was the most difficult experience. And so when I ran for mayor, I hoped that if I was fortunate enough to win, that maybe this chapter would be a different experience. And I did win, and it's thus far been a very different and more positive experience. Because everybody now is seeing Sacramento for the way those of us who have lived here for a long time have always seen it, but even more so. That this is the greatest place that anyone can imagine to live, to grow a business, to invent, to gain an education, and to participate in an incredible civic life and civic culture. And what's happened is that for so long, Sacramento has been a traditional capital city and a government town. That's what we've been. And while we maintain our stature and status as the capital city of the most important public service body, I think, in the country, the state legislature and the executive branch of California state government, we're no longer just a government town. We're no longer just a government town. In part, we've learned lessons that you can't base a local economy on the ups and downs of a state budget that you don't control. You know, as I learned that. And that Sacramento itself is so well positioned in every way to be the center of global entrepreneurship. It is our relationship with and our proximity to leading universities in the country and the world, including Sacramento State and UC Davis and UC Berkeley and Stanford. It's a great community college system. It's the confluence of two rivers. It's the heart of the food basket of the country and the world. It is the cost of living. It's the proximity to the Silicon Valley and to the Bay Area. And it was especially noteworthy during the early months of my term when the leaders of the Bay Area Council, the leading chamber of commerce in the Bay Area, declared without hesitation that they saw Sacramento as part of a broader region, what we call the mega region, and said, who would ever hear this coming from the mouths of a civic leader who wasn't as visionary and expansive as the leaders of the Bay Area Council were and are. That if you are having trouble starting your business in the Bay Area or living in the Bay Area because of the cost of living, don't move to Texas. Don't move to Seattle. Don't move to North Carolina. Don't move to Los Angeles. Come to Sacramento. Come to Sacramento because we're an extension, in the most positive sense of the word, with the Bay Area. And so I've had 10 months now to see whether or not that's a lot of hype or whether it's actually becoming true. And I look at Electrify America deciding to designate Sacramento as the green city and to give us through the Air Resources Board $44 million to electrify Sacramento. I participated in seeing the Verizon company decide to make Sacramento their test city for small cell and hopefully 5G and invest $100 million or so in infrastructure. I see the excitement around the Amazon possibilities. Who knows how that turns out? I see that we are on the verge of attracting some major companies and major industries. I see the formation of the autonomous vehicle coalition and the excitement around Sacramento being the test ground for autonomous vehicles, and not only being the test ground, but being the public policy laboratory and feeding our result to the regulators at the state capitol. I see the excitement about making Sacramento a destination city. I see farm to fork. I see what's happening with the millennial generation and the housing boom in the downtown and the midtown. And yes, we've got great challenges. That's what comes with growth, with being a big city. Homelessness as an example. But last week we forged an unprecedented partnership with Sacramento County and now have $108 million of city-county resources to help get 2,500 people off the streets over the next 3 years. Everything is possible here. And I like to see, as I look to the future, I want to ask you to help me, help Sacramento State, help us create the Sacramento Urban Technology Lab. Now I don't see that concept as a building on any particular campus. I see the idea of a Sacramento Urban Technology Lab as our entire city.
Yeah.
It's our entire city. It's what we want to be. And it's what we deserve to be. There is no reason why our city cannot be the next great American city. With technology, with agriculture, with food, with tourism, with innovation and entrepreneurship being our future. You know, there was a weekend date in April where one of the political parties had its major convention in Sacramento. And on Saturday night, they decided to have a big party. Big party. And we made an exception to the general rule, and we closed off 11th Street in and around the entire state capitol. And at midnight, Common, the rapper, came out, and there were, I don't remember exactly what the estimate was, but there were thousands of people at midnight on a spring Sacramento evening having a great time. And I said to my team that was with me, it was one of the rare occasions I actually stayed up until midnight. Usually at about 9:30, but I said, why is this the exception to the rule? Why isn't this what happens in Sacramento all the time? Why isn't this sort of activity, these sorts of festivals, not the way it is every weekend? A couple weeks later, we shut down Broadway on a Sunday so that people could bike and walk, and we had all kinds of food and people having just an incredible time. And again, a once-a-year event. I will tell you that in this city, sooner than later, those kinds of events will be the way it is, and not just some thing we do once in a while to show what we could be, but instead what we have become.
You're here.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me. Love our city, love our university. I should mention one more thing. You always should leave when you get an applause. Not continue. But it would be, I would be missing the moment if I did not say that a city which aspires to be cosmopolitan and have all of these great destination amenities and that does a lot of things can and will be a very good city. Want to be a great city? all of that growth, all that excitement needs to be connected to young people. It needs to be connected to the neighborhoods. And it needs to be connected specifically to education and workforce development. And so this partnership, whether it's through a line Sacramento region, or whether it's the 1,000-strong effort that my office helped launch at the beginning of my mayorship to provide high school students with year-round paid work experiences. Everything is about connecting the dots. Everything is about making sure that the young man or woman from Meadowview, from Oak Park, from North Sacramento, and other neighborhoods of the city, that they are educated and trained for these jobs as entrepreneurs, as high-wage workers in this Sacramento economy. And never forget that. Because it's not just about creating the cool stuff. It's about connecting all of that excitement to the real lives of young people who deserve our best too. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, if that wasn't an inspiring vision of Sacramento's future, I don't know what could be. Thank you, Mayor Steinberg. That was wonderful. Now, I would like to introduce to you our keynote speaker for the afternoon, Aaron Frank, who is a principal faculty at Singularity University. He's a writer and speaker focused on the effects that emerging technologies have on business and society and culture. As a writer, his articles have appeared in Vice's Mother, Wired UK, Forbes, and Speak. And as a speaker, Aaron has lectured for audiences and organizations, including the CIA, the U.S. Department of Defense, the Coca-Cola Company, AAAS, Sony, Under Armour, and more. And we are really, really happy to have him with us today. So please join me in welcoming Aaron Frank.
Good afternoon. How you guys going?
Great.
I'm really inspired and honestly very honored and privileged to be invited to join you this afternoon. And I'm curious, how many of you are familiar with Singularity University in any capacity? Maybe a few hands? Okay. So for those that aren't familiar, so we are a learning organization based in Silicon Valley. So we're headquartered at NASA Research Park. And we focus on a series of rapidly developing information technologies and really focus on trying to understand why the world is changing so quickly and the role that technology is playing in this rapid change that we're seeing. So with your permission, I'm actually going to maybe take this on the move, sort of music concert style. And I'm going to come over here to some images for the presentation. So to begin, I'm curious, how many of you have tried the Oculus Rift, the virtual reality headset? I saw one hand shoot really high, so I imagine that was a few hands. So this is Palmer Luckey. He was on the cover of Wired magazine a few years ago. Not to make any comments about his personal life, but his technology career is really fascinating. So he was on the cover largely because of this. So this was a photo taken from his parents' garage where he wanted to build his own virtual reality headset. He was really frustrated that he could access a VR headset at his university. They had a well-funded research lab. He could use it there. But he went to see if he could purchase something at home that he could use in his bedroom, and there was nothing on the market that was less than $10,000. So basically what he did is he reconfigured our mobile phones have high-resolution displays, batteries, accelerometer, these low-cost components, creates a device, realizes, wow, this actually works really well. So then, unlike in the past, where if you have an idea for something and you need to take this to the venture community, raise money, puts it on Kickstarter, a crowdfunding campaign, and raised what was at the time one of the most successful crowdfunding campaigns ever completed. He raised $2.5 million. So pretty incredible. 18 months after this, he sells the company to Facebook for $2 billion. So that's, of course, not a common story, but a demonstration of what's now possible in the world. Okay. So that's one example. And next. So pictured here on the left, this is an individual in the middle. His name is Makoto Koike, lives in Japan. He's the son of cucumber farmers in Japan. And so one of the challenges that he has with his family is during peak harvest season, his mother would spend upwards of 8 hours a day essentially sorting cucumbers. The reason is that cucumbers can be classified in 9 different categories. They can be, which assigns to 9 different prices. And so his mother would spend 8 hours a day during peak harvest sorting these cucumbers. And so seeing this, Makoto was, thought about, well, how can we improve this for my mother? So this just came out about a year ago. He essentially built in his garage equivalent a cucumber sorter. Now, if you think about this, this is an incredible piece of technology. All of the pieces of this, the sensors that he bought off the shelf, the camera technology, he uses an open source machine learning platform called TensorFlow that's built by Google. The computer that he uses to run the machine learning is just a desktop computer. All of those components, 5 years ago, this machine would have cost tens of millions of dollars. Google would have had to carve out an entire line item of budget just to build this machine if they wanted to do it. And now you have the son of cucumber farmers in Japan who's able to build essentially, what was once only available to the most well-funded companies or research labs. So with both of these examples, the point I want to make is really the entire story that I'll share this afternoon is one of a story of technologies that were once expensive. Only the well-funded research labs, universities, governments had access to them, are today becoming affordable. And what this means is that far more people can now access these tools. So if you were to get up and leave now, want to go get coffee, you would have basically understood the key point that I wanted to share with you this afternoon. So just, no problem if that's the case. So the rest of the presentation, I'd like to set some context and explore some of the implications of this, and maybe go deeper and explore the technologies that we're seeing follow this trend. So there's really 2 pieces of what we'll go share through the rest of the afternoon. The first is an important concept. At Singularity University, we're primarily focused on what's called exponential thinking, this idea that technologies are moving at an exponential rate. So it's kind of, I'll explain what I mean when I say this, and then we'll cover some of these information technologies that we're now seeing move at this rate. So what do I mean when I say exponential thinking? So on the surface, we are familiar with exponential functions. We learn about them in high school math. You take an exponent, raise it to it, or take a base number, raise it to an exponent. But really what we're referring to here is this idea that the human mind is actually really poorly equipped to navigate what actually occurs as an exponential function goes forward. Our brains are really not wired to do this. So as an example, a thought experiment, I might ask you to join me in a thought experiment. So imagine that your manager, your boss, your professor, your voters come into your office and they ask you to make a decision. They're having a tough time choosing between 2 options and they need you to help us make a choice. So option A is basically a giant pile of money. It's $1 million, a lot of money. You can have this right away. You can use this, you can invest it, you can do whatever you want with this $1 million. You get it on day 1, ready to go. Option 2 is a penny. Except it's an interesting penny in that it doubles every day for 30 days, and whatever accumulates at the end of that month, you get to keep and walk away. So this is kind of a very basic example in sort of compound math, but I can tell you, this thought experiment was shared with me as an 8-year-old when I was in 3rd grade, and I can tell you that as a room full of 8-year-olds, it was a pretty obvious choice. $1 million, we want $1 million, of course. So I ask you, which is the better option? Would you take $1 million or the penny? Pennies. So you guys are smart. You guys are not like me as an 8-year-old. So that's, as we know, you get the idea. This is a story of compounding growth. But there's a challenge with the way that this actually unfolds. And by the way, this decision is not unlike many of the decisions that our elected officials, our managers, our boards of directors, our executives, our innovation directors are asked to make every single day. What technology do we invest in? What platform do we acquire to use or build a system? Okay, so let's say correctly, you choose the penny, but then your manager goes away, and then they come back halfway through the month to check on that penny. They say, well, that pile of money looks pretty good. We're halfway through the month. On day 15, they come back into your office, and they want to know. They want to see how that penny is doing. So we're halfway through the month. We should be at $500,000, right? That would make sense. That would make us feel good. $163. That's not good. That's not a lot of money. That's in most big companies, this is alarm bells when you've invested in the technology and it doesn't really scale or take off in the way that you've expected it to. Okay, so as we know, what's true of exponential curves is that every step in a function is the equivalent of all of the previous steps combined. So that in this case, in this example, we know that we do actually reach that $1 million threshold on the 27th day. And at the end of the month, 30 days later, the 31st of the month, you've accumulated $10 million, 10 times what was in that briefcase. So that's really the counterintuitive notion, the idea that the majority of this has accumulated just in the final few steps. So this is sort of a basic, reconstruction of how exponentials work, but this is a really important phenomenon. We are only just recently coming to terms that the story of science and technology and innovation, even across the story of human history, has followed this compounding exponential trajectory. We've seen more changes happen in the last 50 years in science and technology than we've seen in the last 50,000 years. And almost every technology domain, when I speak to experts or the faculty that come to Singularity University, the key thing I hear over and over again is I've seen more happen in the last 18 months than I've seen in my entire career. And this is a key thing we hear over and over again. So why might this be the case? So this might be the most important thing I will show you in this entire presentation. And this gets at explaining why we're seeing so much change and so much rapid innovation in the world today. So this was a chart put together by an individual named Ray Kurzweil. He's one of the co-founders at Singularity University. He asked an interesting question. He wanted to know the price performance. So if you paid $1,000, how much computing power would you receive in return over the last 100 years? So this phenomenon that goes back to the late 20th century, or the early 20th century. So keep in mind, 100 years ago, when you paid $1,000 for computing power, you're actually paying for human labor. You were paying people whose jobs it were to calculate numbers. The term calculator actually comes from it used to be a job. Imagine on LinkedIn, someone's role today would be calculator. But what we've seen in the story of computing is this smooth exponential compounding development, which is an incredible phenomenon. There's maybe two things to point out about why this chart is so significant. So the first is, if you know, that this is on a log chart. So this is not drawn to scale on a sort of a linear scale. So what that means is this dot here on the left, which represents the world's most powerful computer of its time, is 1,000,000 billion times lower than the dot here all the way on the right. So we've done the math. If you draw this linearly on a regular loose leaf piece of paper, this chart drawn to scale would be 60,000 times further away than the moon. It'd be 25 trillion meters tall. That's the nature of how much power, price performance improvements we've seen in computing. So just an example. So this is the Q7. This was a $10 billion computer built in 1957 by IBM. It weighed 300 tons. It had one client. It was the US Air Force computer. This machine is not even a fraction as powerful as the computer that you all likely have in your pocket. So in fact, someone had too much time on their hand, put the numbers together to figure out, using computing technology from the 50s, to get this machine to perform at the same level as the iPhone X that just came out. This computer would cost $150 trillion in today's dollars. It would fill a building 3 kilometers wide, 3 kilometers long, as tall as the Empire State Building, and would consume as much energy as the world produces every year, times 30. So you all have in your pocket far more computing power than the entire US Air Force had in the 50s, or even more recently. So this, in the late 90s, the ASCII Red was a supercomputer. It was the first supercomputer measured at teraflops performance. The size of a tennis court. The Department of Defense spent $55 million on this. 9 years later, you could buy an equivalent computing power machine for $500. You might recognize it. Because we've gone from something that was, available only to well-funded research labs to essentially, a recreational toy. And you might be familiar with Moore's law. I haven't mentioned the term Moore's law, maybe the most famous example of exponential growth. But Moore's law is named for Gordon Moore at Intel, who noted that the number of transistors we could fit on an integrated circuit was doubling every 2 years or so. And that's really what we've seen drive the most recent paradigm of computing. So these are numbers that Intel put together, just to get our minds wrapped around Moore's Law. What if we saw the same, okay, so this chip on the left is 3,500 times, sorry, the chip here on the right is 3,500 times more powerful, 60,000 times cheaper, and 90,000 times more energy efficient. So what if we saw, those are difficult numbers to wrap our minds around. What if we saw the same improvements in performance gains in this car? So this car today would go 300,000 miles an hour. It would get 2 million miles to the gallon. Any guesses how much the car costs? You can get all of that for 4 pennies. That's just Moore's Law. That's just this recent era of integrated circuits. And what makes this chart so significant is that this dates back over over 100 years. We've seen that compounding exponential growth for 100 years. Which leads us to maybe one of the more peculiar aspects of this chart, which is why is it so predictable? Why does computing follow this compounding law? We've had world wars, we've had all of these variables in the marketplace, we've had all of these things. Why is it so predictable? And that's really the core research that Ray Kurzweil spent his academic career at MIT really trying to understand. He wrote an essay about 20 years ago. It's called The Law of Accelerating Returns. It's a kind of complex, it's a theory of evolution that suggests that information systems that improve over time can, as they become information enabled, sort of ride these exponential trends. It's not really a clean way of phrasing it, but essentially, if you want to learn more, you can read the essay. But why this is significant is that all of these technology areas today are all becoming information sciences. They're all really becoming computer sciences. Biotechnology, we only discovered DNA as a system a single generation ago. The idea that biology can be encoded in a sort of a digital substrate with A, T, C's, and G's filling in for sort of as like a software system. So through bioinformatics and genomic sciences, the human body is now being subject to that same computing environment. And so that chart I showed you could think of as really like the engine. As it moves exponentially, it is now driving any environment that becomes an information science. And that's a really significant trend that's happening in the world today, and that's moving very quickly. So with that in mind, let's move on to just explore some of these technologies and the implications that we're seeing come online. So these are now becoming information sort of computing driven technology areas. So the first is, you're likely familiar with it, 3D printing. So this video, this is a MakerBot. It's it doesn't really print anything people want to spend money on yet. But what was significant about it is that it really changed the world's mind about how we might make things in the future. And so this is an example of, essentially what the MakerBot was significant was because it took the big $200,000 industrial printers and created a $2,000 desktop version that many more people could get access to. And so even just in 3D printing, just to get a sense of the speed of innovation that we're seeing, this is a video that was just released about a year and a half ago by a company they've rebranded as just Carbon, based in Redwood City, a new type of manufacturing. So what you're seeing is the raw material that's being printed is a liquid. It's a liquid resin. The nozzle is releasing light and oxygen. It creates a photochemical reaction. It basically grows these objects out of goo. So it's pretty crazy to look at. It kind of, reminds you of Terminator a bit. The reason this is significant is this object that you're seeing printed would take a traditional printer like the MakerBot about 7 or 8 hours to manufacture. This object was printed in 10 minutes. That's a really big deal. One of the questions around 3D printing is the limitations around scalability. Will we ever mass produce things that people want to actually pay money for? And we're now seeing this come online, where companies like Adidas partnering with companies like Carbon, they have plans to basically print shoes out of goo in a sort of mass production scale way of doing this. So this also has, and I'm going to stick with sort of the retail and apparel industry as an example, but this applies to far more industries than just apparel. But consider the implications on design and sort of resources. So you may notice I actually didn't bring sort of business casual appropriate footwear today, but this is a shoe developed by a company, Under Armour, which I should mention was also created by a single individual in their dorm room from my alma mater, to the University of Maryland. So this shoe, the innovation team at Under Armour wanted to create a footsole that used the least amount of material as possible, so they wanted to reduce waste, while also maintaining the highest strength to weight profile. So when you step on the shoe, it still has high performance. So the way they designed this shoe is they basically gave those two constraints to a computer program, basically an algorithm that can run thousands of experiments, every single day to come up with the designs that meet those requirements. And what it came up with was this lattice structure, which, by the way, you could never manufacture this any other way other than 3D printing. You could never injection mold something with this sort of complex patterning. So even the design of coming up with the things that we'll be using are now being outsourced to powerful machines, sort of a human and computer collaboration to come up with these designs. So what does that mean as a business or a region or supply chains and so forth? So consider an apparel company. So a clothing company likely has on their staff someone whose job it is to come up with the designs that people will want to be wearing. So today we're in November, so I imagine companies are working on sort of like a spring fashion line. Months in advance, they have to figure out how many small, mediums, and larges people want to pay for. If it gets high, then you have, you're left with excess inventory. That's where you get the, factory clearance warehouse sales at the end of the season. Or if it gets low, you're leaving money on the table. You get investors who are, upset with you. So companies spend a lot of money trying to get this right. But what if making clothing became more like how we make software? So this is just a very small proof of concept. A company founded by actually one of our faculty at Singularity University in Seattle. It's a company called Bombsheller. They don't make a lot of clothing at the moment, but they do make one product, leggings that for athletes, like yoga pants that people do yoga classes or go running in. So this company doesn't have on their staff a single designer. In fact, every one of the designs that you can buy are created by the customers themselves. The way it works, you go online, you put any image you want over the clothing. If you want a map of Sacramento, you could upload that and put it onto your pants. And then you go on the website and you get a catalog. Not a single one of these have ever been made before. These images are basically being rendered using video game technology. So again, powerful computing to demonstrate what a product looks like. So then when you, as the customer, click buy, you go online, you buy a pair of pants, instead of waiting months to get your clothing shipped from somewhere around the world, the material in their factory comes off the line, goes to the printer, gets cut in the right space, and then essentially an inkjet printer, not unlike a 3D printer, inks on the design, they put it in a box, and they send it to you 9 hours later. Now, the only part of this entire process that's not automated is the stitching. And that's because of the complexity of working with fabrics and loose garments. But even that is now at risk of being automated. This was a demonstration of a kid, I'll tell the story in a moment, who basically demonstrated the first time that we can automate the stitching of clothes. So even the automation piece of this, or the stitching piece of this, is at risk of being automated. There's huge implications of that for the labor market, for the millions of wage earners who do this for a living. The story about this arm is incredible. So I interviewed a kid. He's a 25-year-old, lives in Seattle. He had no background in manufacturing, no background in robotics. He basically couldn't sleep one night because he was watching an episode of How It's Made where they were showing how robots try to make jeans. And he noticed that there were a lot of human fingertips along the way. He couldn't sleep. He's like, I just read an article about this water-soluble material that 3D printers use. You could actually use that for clothes. And so in the past, the only companies that could have tested that idea had access to millions of dollars of robotic equipment. This kid is able to rent this robot arm from a Danish company for a few $1,000s and test this idea. And now he's being invited by the Department of Defense to build out his concept. So a kid in Seattle, no background in the area, basically by Googling stuff, is now innovating in what has world-changing impact potentially. I mean, there's a deeper conversation to be had about the labor market and what this means for jobs. But again, a single individual. I mean, that's an incredible world that we live in. And so I'll come back to this image. Because really what we're looking at, this MakerBot, you can think of as like a little programmable factory. Like Bombshell, the company, it's basically a programmable factory. It doesn't care what it makes. It doesn't care how much of what it makes. It creates things that are on demand, personalized, made to order. And that's not just how we're going to make clothing, like shoes and apparel. It's going to be how we make appliances, how we make cosmetics, consumer packaged goods. all of this, even cars. If you think I'm crazy, this is a car made by a company called Local Motors. My colleague Sean, who's riding in a car that was entirely 3D printed. It has fewer than 50 parts, entirely electric. This thing was printed in less than 24 hours. Wow. The cars themselves, personalized, on demand, made to order. And you can do this anywhere in the world, here in Sacramento. You don't have to ship this in from Detroit, another country, anything. All right, can I get a time check? Oh, perfect, we're great. All right, moving on. How many of you have heard or read about artificial intelligence? Getting a lot of press right now. Yeah, I see the waving hand. So you might have heard of what are called these sort of deep learning neural nets. I can show you a picture of essentially what it looks like. You can think of it as sort of layers of digital neurons that you feed data sets through, and it learns to basically find patterns, and you can do really interesting things with that. Actually, neural nets are not new. They've been around for about 70 years. There's a technique that's been sort of written about, studied for decades within the AI community. What is new is that the price of data, sort of this missing necessary ingredient, has finally become cheap enough that more people can access it. Another example of these exponential curves. So, in the early 80s, a gig of data would have cost you basically a Ferrari. Today, it's it's negligible. We don't even think about it. It's, gigs. I think this thing probably has like 24 gigs on it just in my hand. So data itself is maybe the one thing in our world that is growing unlike anything else in the world. So Google, and actually the Berkeley School of Information Sciences did a really interesting study. They wanted to know how much data humanity had created from the beginning of time until around 2003, so just before this digital explosion that we moved into. Kind of a qualitative assessment, things like cave art and trying to guess how much data was in the Library of Alexandria, but all of the data throughout human history, they equated to about 5 exabytes of data. So that's a lot of data. That's 5 billion gigabytes. That's about 40,000 Libraries of Congress. We now create 5 exabytes of data every 2 days. So we create a human history's worth of data every 2 days. All of that data is now being fed into these really sophisticated neural nets and these AI systems that can do really interesting things. So I do like to typically, and I've actually been showing this video for quite a few years, because it's one of the best demonstrations of getting a sense for what AI looks like and feels like. But every 10 years or so, you might be familiar with the IBM Watson project. Every 10 years, IBM seems to create a challenge for themselves in computer science. So 10 years ago, they said, well, can we build a computer that can beat a world grandmaster in chess? And this was at a time when experts were saying, there's no way, chess is far too complex, there are far too many permutations in a game. And then in 1997, they built the machine, what was Deep Blue, which earned worldwide headlines for beating Garry Kasparov at the game of chess. I mean, this was an incredible, stunning breakthrough. 10 years later, they said, okay, so chess was interesting, but can we build a system that can navigate even more complex environment? And so they chose natural language, which if you're a Jeopardy fan, you know the game show is built on really difficult language puzzles, double meaning, sarcasm, etc. So I don't have the audio working, but I'll just kind of play the clip and let it roll. And there's one thing that I would encourage you to pay attention to, which is this indicator at the bottom. Which, by the way, does anyone watch Jeopardy? Does anyone recognize the guy on the left?
Alex Trebek.
Oh yeah, well, Trebek for sure. But yeah, here's the name. Ken Jennings. Okay, so Ken Jennings is like cult Ike's hero in Jeopardy circles. Unbreakable record of consecutive wins. Does anyone know this guy? You know? Who's it? Yeah, it's Brad. I've been asking this question, like everyone knows. So Brad is the second best Jeopardy champion, and no one ever knows Brad. Second, you're the first person. Yeah, amazing. That's great that you know that. I've never met anyone. Everyone knows Ken Jennings, but I've never met someone, so that's great. Second best, but yeah, so in some areas maybe more champions. These are the 2 best all-time Jeopardy champions that have ever played this game show that the computer was able to beat their combined score. So what you may have seen at the bottom of the screen is a really important concept, this indicator which was indicating the degree of confidence that Watson is certain in its own answer. So it doesn't actually give you an answer. It's not traditional computer programs, software engineering, where you provide an input, the system has logic gates, and it kicks out an answer. What Watson is doing is it's providing a probability. That probability is constantly self-correcting, changing, and improving over time based on new information. What's really significant about that is there's no engineer explicitly giving Watson the rules for how to do that. Watson is learning on its own. And that phenomenon, this transition in computer science from this sort of explicit rules-based, in software engineering, Silicon Valley, where I live, is built on just, streets filled with programmers who explicitly design the logic gates, the rules that help computer systems do this. We are now moving into a world of learning where a computer can teach itself. I mean, that is, we'll get in a moment, this is crazy stuff. This is maybe sort of the modern version of that deep blue moment. You may have seen this headline. If you haven't, this was a year or two ago. Google built an AI system that beat the world's best Go champion. If you're not, I wasn't familiar with Go before this, but the reason Go is significant as a board game is because of the complexity. So where chess is a game has an 8x8 grid, Go has a 19x19 board grid. In fact, in a game of Go, there are more possible moves than there are atoms in the known universe. It's actually crazier than that. If every atom in the known universe was itself a universe full of that same number of atoms, there would still be more possible games of Go than that number of atoms. It's an incredibly complex and sophisticated game. And so the way that Google built a machine to play this game is they basically had it watch millions and millions of Go moves, and then had it play itself millions and millions of times, which is a fascinating way to train a neural net. But what's really significant, the engineers who built this system cannot explain to you how it is that it plays the game. We are now building systems, including driverless cars, which you're going to hear more about, all of these machine learning systems that you're hearing about. We are building systems that we, the engineers, those of the people creating them, cannot explain to you how they work, how they function. And that's a significant transition that's happening. So how is this actually going to apply itself to the real world? So there are some great benefits that this brings. And so in the case of, take a large technology company that has huge data servers, like Google or Facebook. In these companies, usually the second highest expense behind salaries is the electricity bill. And that's because it's very expensive to run the cooling systems that keep the servers from overheating. Facebook's done some weird stuff by building a server in the North Pole. So Google took that same system that learned how to play AlphaGo and applied it to managing the cooling system in their data farm. So these servers are incredibly complex. A met set of variables, the time of year, the time of day, the weather outside, the temperature outside. And based on those variables, the engineers control the coolers, the cooling pumps, the water coolers, etc. And by giving those controls over to a machine learning algorithm that taught itself how to do this more efficiently, they're able to cut 40% of their electricity, which represented a 15% overall gain in their power bill. That represents millions of dollars in savings and a huge reduction in the carbon footprint, etc. We're going to apply the same technology to drug discovery. The idea that researchers are testing tens of thousands of biological compounds and their interaction with the human body and how we can develop new medicines. Essentially what a grad student does in a white lab coat, can run maybe dozens of experiments every week. And now, an AI can do that, thousands of times faster. And this is already being applied to medicine and how we deliver care. So this was a story. So IBM Watson has graduated from playing Jeopardy, is now working with certain hospital systems. The first one was in New York, Sloan Kettering. And so there's a story in Japan already of a patient who physicians were stumped. They didn't know how to diagnose her or treat her. They actually gave her a diagnosis of a rare blood disorder, and when they prescribed her a treatment protocol, she didn't improve, and they were confused by this. So they gave her information, her medical records, her genetic information to Watson, and in about a day, Watson came back with a kind of a puzzling diagnosis, leukemia. And when the physicians were able to, treat her for this, she improved over time. So physicians will be working alongside these systems as they improve, and they still need to get better before they become, a truly mainstream technology application. And maybe the way that we interact with public space becomes different as well. So this is a company in Mountain View. Very simple. They take these same machine learning algorithms, they look at the data of satellite footage that we take of planet Earth. So the number of pixels that we're creating over time is exploding. So basically what they can do is they can take a picture of a parking lot, and they can train an algorithm to detect what a parked car looks like. And from that information, they can go to any retail store, like a Walmart or Westfield Mall, and they can predict, better than a room of Bloomberg analysts, what's going to happen to that company's stock price. So they know whether Walmart's earnings are going to hit or come under their earnings estimates based on basically just a camera in the sky and a machine learning algorithm that knows what it's looking at. So the way we interact with physical space is being impacted by this as well. And I'm not going to touch on driverless cars. You're going to hear more about that in the next session. But ultimately, this point I want to make is all of these technologies, which even just a few years ago were only available to the sort of most well-funded companies, are becoming accessible so that many more people can have access to them. This is an individual who basically built his own driverless car in his own garage. I don't envy the journalist who he threw in the car to write the story. And in the article you read about it, he had never tested the car before. It was the first time. Kind of a risky mission. The last example, before I close, just briefly, I want to mention one company that was founded at Singularity University that tracked the exponential improvement over time of drone technology. So again, a technology that was not very long ago only available to Department of Defense, governments around the world, and we're seeing this improvement in these drones carrying capacity, the ability to carry packages over time. So this is a company called Matternet that looked at the development over time. They were founded in 2010, so very early, sort of around consumer drones taking off. They built a physical mesh network delivery system to deliver packaged goods in a city. And their first example of this is being deployed already. It's now active in Switzerland. Hospitals are using it to deliver blood samples and vials of sort of risky medicine that needs to be kept cold in a system that can fly over the city and deliver packages from place to place. So this science fiction future that we imagine where drones delivering things around the world, I mean, this is already now possible because the technology has fallen at such an impressive and exponential rate. I'm going to skip this last section and just end with this idea that as humans, again, we have a tough time navigating these exponential curves and the foresight to predict the trends as they come. And so, to go back to that penny example, the reason I, as an 8-year-old, and our sort of impulsive minds tend to pick that $1 million is because in the short term, these exponential trends leave us disappointed. This is sort of, when Google Glass was announced and everyone said, oh, it's kind of expensive, it looks weird, you're kind of a cyborg person when you wear them, augmented reality is not here, or nanotechnology in the 90s, or technologies follow this pattern. This is why big companies tend to sort of overlook new technologies before they take off. But what we're starting to understand and learn is that these exponential trends really drive many of these technology areas forward. And so with that, I'll leave you with a quote. This is Kurzweil, our founder, who talks about this idea that we won't experience 100 years of progress in the 21st century. It'll be more like 20,000 years. That's a really difficult concept for our minds to conceive and understand. But that's really the future that we're moving into, and it's a future that's moving far faster than we really have an ability to grasp and comprehend. So with that, I do, again, want to thank you for having me, and I'm privileged to join you, and I look forward to the discussion this afternoon.
Okay, well, that was incredibly thought-provoking, and I wonder if all of you are sitting in the audience wondering about what you're working on today and how that's going to be different, like tomorrow, right? And how does Sacramento even get its hands around some of these ideas and technologies? I know, it's mind-blowing. So thank you for an amazing presentation and for giving us a huge challenge, I think, but an exciting one. So Let's welcome to the stage our next speaker. He's the Executive Director for the UC Davis Policy Institute for Energy, Environment, and the Economy. Austin Brown focuses on technologies and policies for clean energy and sustainable transportation. He directs the UC Davis Policy Institute for Energy, the Environment, and the Economy, which leverages world-class university expertise and engages directly with decision makers to deliver credible, relevant, and timely information and analysis to inform better energy and environmental policy. He recently served in 18 North Detail in the Obama White House, Office of Science and Technology Policy. Please join me in welcoming Austin Brown.
I wonder a little bit. We'll see. I find that, so first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting. I love that talk. I love the energy and the atmosphere here, all the cool stuff that's going on. I find that I give the best talks when I stick to what I know and what I'm comfortable with. But I have the most fun when I talk about stuff that I have to kind of speculate about randomly. So I've got a little bit of a blend, probably about half and half of the stuff that I'm kind of very comfortable with and the things that I'm kind of putting out there for discussion. So see if you can try to figure out which parts are which. And I'll try to leave a little bit of time for questions and discussion if I can. Although I think in the history of me doing public speaking, I've maybe ended early twice ever. So the odds aren't all that good, but I'll see what I can do. So I think about the world largely through the lens of energy and climate change. I see this as an existential problem. I also see this as an existential opportunity. And really for a lot of the same reasons that we heard about in the last presentation, all the different sorts of technology innovation that's going on. And really our silver bullet here, and the thing that gives us a lot of hope for the future with energy and climate change is technology. So I'll start by talking about how technology is improving very quickly. And the major global goals, such as 80% reduced greenhouse gas emissions, are achievable. And this is important because that's the sort of levels that science tells us are necessary to avoid the worst impacts of human-caused climate change. So it's a really big deal that we think we have the tools in the toolbox to get there. But major challenges remain, especially making sure that these technologies provide benefits to everybody and that they work throughout society and not just for rich countries and rich people. But meeting these challenges will also create enormous opportunities. There's huge business models that could meet these different sorts of opportunities. And then I'm going to end on maybe a little bit, given what we just heard, on a controversial point, that I believe that Moore's Law is not in itself a savior here. I believe it's incredibly important and maybe the thing that makes it possible, but we can't just sit back and let Moore do all of our work for us. It can help us help ourselves. So technology is improving fast. This is a report that the Department of Energy produces called Revolution Now. The last report was put out in 2016. To be TBD, they'll continue to produce this. It shows the improvement in cost for a variety of clean energy technologies since 2008. So they're all indexed to 0% improvement then, and then looking at improvements for wind of 40%, distributed photovoltaic solar panels on your roof, and utility scale of more than 50%, it's a really big drop in that short amount of time. Improved battery costs, which we're seeing in electric vehicles, I'll talk more about those. And maybe most dramatic, people often don't get this by asking this, what is the technology that you've seen have the biggest improvement in cost? It's actually LED light bulbs. So light that you might get for your home dropped 94% since 2008. That's absolutely astonishing. It's not a coincidence probably that many of these technologies have embedded in them a lot of the same technologies that we're developing in the information technology space. And so we can often co-opt those same semiconductor technologies and use them to improve some of these. So the second point I mentioned is that we believe 80% reductions economy-wide are achievable. This is from a report we put out in the closing days of the Obama administration, which for I think obvious reasons, this was published in November of 2016. For obvious reasons, it didn't attract an enormous amount of attention. But we did look at scenarios, what we call the mid-century strategy of getting to 80% reduced overall emissions economy-wide in the United States. This was the first time that a government report at least looked at levels that were that deep. And we found there are pathways to do it, but you really need to bring every single technology that you have in the toolbox to bear. You need to reduce emissions from cleaner energy. You need to address transportation system technologies, top to bottom. You need to improve industrial technologies, building technologies, and you need to look at improving carbon uptake with things like better land use and maybe even looking at carbon capture and usage or storage technologies. So you have the tools, but boy, you need to get started and you need to work really, really fast. So I'm going to look at a few examples where the technology is moving very quickly, and that we have a few challenges remaining, and look at maybe a few thought experiments for some business models and approaches, business opportunities that can be exploited as we roll those out. So electric vehicles, I'm aware this is an eye chart, and I've sort of done that intentionally because it makes my point for me. Electric vehicles, this is the monthly sales of electric vehicles going back to 2010, when there were essentially no electric vehicles on the market. If you get a Tesla Roadster, if you really knew who to ask and had put in your name in a waiting list and had a lot of money, but otherwise you were stuck with gasoline. And we've seen a pretty dramatic growth there, not just in the total sales, but the reason I want to include this chart with all these different colors is that each of those colors is a different vehicle model. And we've seen a proliferation of the number of models available, and that shows no sign of slowing down. So more and more automakers are announcing not just 1 or 2 electric vehicles in their portfolio, but 10 or 20 that they'll start to become available in the next few years. So we've seen this growth, it drops and increases based seasonally with some of the auto trends, and a really proliferation in the number of models. But we're still talking about a fairly small share of the total market. You have to be realistic here. This is still not a mainstream vehicle, and it's not a mainstream option for everybody for a variety of reasons. And a lot of people, even in California, really only about half of people in California are even aware of the electric vehicles, in that they can name a single model. So we do have an incredibly long way to go. So we have a bunch of societal needs, and for each of these I'm going to look at on the left, kind of what do we need out of this technology? What are we worried that if we just go into play blindly we might miss out on? And then on the right, what are some business models that potentially help meet those? So for EVs, electric vehicles, one of the biggest questions is how do we actually maximize the environmental benefits from these technologies? You can build an electric vehicle in a way, and build and use an electric vehicle in a way that isn't as beneficial for the environment, depending on, for example, how you build the battery, whether or not you recycle the battery or reuse the battery, and most obviously where the electricity comes from the vehicle. So we've done the work. We know that on average these vehicles are much better for the environment than gasoline vehicles, but you still want to maximize that. So there's a couple of business models that will come up to enable that. So smart electric vehicle charging is one where you wouldn't just plug the vehicle in and have it charge, as most people do now, but you'd actually allow timed use of that vehicle to take maximum advantage of renewable energy. So when I plug my vehicle in when I get home, rather than charging immediately, it would wait until there was surplus wind available somewhere on the grid that could then be essentially used in my vehicle, rather than charging immediately, but still guaranteed to me that it would be available for me when I'm ready to leave for work in the morning. We also look at business models for battery reuse, for example, for stationary applications for the grid, and battery recycling, reclaiming some of those chemicals that went into the battery in the first place. The vehicle is a very highly recycled item. A lot of the stuff when you scrap a vehicle ends up getting back into the vehicle stream, but these batteries are pretty new technologies, and we still need to do a lot of work to figure out how to make them most beneficial. I should say, when I say when I plug in my vehicle, I actually now get to say that for real. So after I lived in DC for 9 years and didn't own a car, I waited just long enough so when I moved back to an environment where I actually needed one for not daily use, but a couple of times a week sort of use, there were enough electric vehicles out there on the market for me to have a great option. So I'm kind of a part-time unpaid evangelist for my Chevy Bolt, which is out there in the lot. It's the first sort of commercially widely available, affordable vehicle with more than 200 miles of range. And my parents live 100 miles from my house, so there you go. I am learning a lot about the infrastructure that isn't there still. When I didn't have one, I looked at the map and went, oh, there's chargers everywhere. And now I go, oh, how can I never find a charger when I need one? So there's other ways to go. So that's one of those that gets you into these rapid EV deployment sorts of societal needs, getting them out there as quickly as possible, and where you have a business opportunity around improving that technology that's embedded in the electric vehicle, and then really innovative charging models, making sure that you're able to get people charged up and on the road as quickly as possible. Right now, most chargers take a fair amount of time. They're not always available. They're not always available for use. It was fun. Okay, clean energy is next, and this comes from that same Revolution Now report. In addition to looking at the cost improvements, which are the blue bars, we also looked at the deployment that we've seen as a result. And we've seen this wonderful kind of X curve, where as the technology costs come down, in the case of wind over decades and decades on the top, then you finally sort of hit that tipping point where it becomes affordable, or in many cases now the cheapest option, and you see that deployment start to spike up and start to resemble some of those exponential trends that we've heard about. So we're done, right? Clean energy is done. Okay, no, not even close. So wind and solar are still a fairly small portion. They're growing very, very quickly. And then maybe most importantly, we know that to get to high levels of clean energy, we'll need cheaper technology. Sure, we'll want to be able to bring in those businesses. But we need to start to figure out how to do the best possible job of grid integration. We know a lot more about grid integration than we did 20 years ago. 20 years ago, when you talked about scenarios of more than 20% wind and solar, people would say, oh, I don't think we can ever do that. That sounds hard. Who knows when the sun will shine and when the wind will blow? So I think the talking point we hear all the time. It turns out we do know when the sun will shine. It shines during the day, and we're getting much better at telling when the wind will blow. It's fairly predictable. But you actually get serious once you start to get these levels of 50%, 90%, levels that before, when people talk about them, they talk about them like old maps where they'd say, oh, up on this corner there be dragons. We know that 90% is not unachievable. It will require some work, and that then provides enormous business opportunity. So getting better forecasting, so you know day ahead, week ahead, what do you expect that wind to be doing? If it's an hour ahead, if it's missing what you had thought the way how the wind is going to be behaving, how do you then bring on something else as a substitute or roll out stored energy? Grid management, how do you actually pass power from place to place better? There's some creative business models around that. And then you tend to get down to energy storage. People love to start with that and say, oh, we'll just throw a bunch of energy storage at it. But batteries are still expensive, and all the other things you can do tend to be cheaper than that. So yes, battery storage is the first. Let's get smarter about how we integrate power, our forecasting, how we pass it around from power center to power center. The last one I'll talk about is automated vehicles, everybody's favorite. I won't have enormous amount of time to go super deeply into this. If anybody wants to find me at any time, I will always ramble about automated vehicles for any amount of time that I'm allowed to speak. It's the most kind of cool and crazy and exciting technology that's come on really since I've been working on transportation. Nobody was talking about this a decade ago, and now it's really become the most exciting topic. So I've pulled a few exciting models out there. I'm not trying to play favorites with any of these individual companies. I just want to make the point that companies are innovating very intensely around what the form factor and what the use case of these vehicles are going to be. So we have a luxury vehicle from the bottom left, a demonstration vehicle that's essentially a mobile living room, where you get in, you can roll around, you can take a nap, you can chat with your family. The seats all turn towards each other so you can have lovely family time. I don't know about how you guys' families are, but that wouldn't work all that well in road trips for me, but at least maybe that works better for some other families. But then also looking at models that are much smaller than a micro vehicle, where it's designed so it wouldn't have pedals or steering wheels. And that you'd be able to get in that vehicle, take it for a short range, get back out. It would be sort of undifferentiated rented vehicle, part of the fleet. Those are radically different business models. And then one of the things that we spend a lot of our time thinking about is what are the implications of those two different business models. When we look at automated vehicles, people tend to assume they're going to do all the things that we want. They're going to solve all of our problems in transportation. They're going to reduce our emissions. They're going to usher in electric vehicles. They're going to make transportation so cheap that we don't even need to bother with it anymore. They're going to improve congestion, improve equity, give transportation to everybody else. One of the things I spend a lot of time thinking about is unintended consequences. And when we look at a technology as disruptive as this, as disruptive as automated vehicles, I can guarantee you there are going to be unintended consequences. And we spend a lot of time trying to figure out what those might be and what we should do about it. So if everybody owns their mobile living room, doesn't mind living 100 miles from their place of employment or wherever they might want to go for the weekend, because you've got a vehicle that can drive around while you have breakfast, or while you watch a movie, or while you take a nap or catch up on email, people might live very, very far from their destinations. They might use their vehicles in ways that are great for them, but have negative impacts on factors like congestion and equity and land use. One example I like to give is if I have this and I want to go meet my friends for happy hour in San Francisco, it might take me down there, I'd get out, but parking in San Francisco is expensive. I'm not paying $20. Why don't I just have my vehicle circle the block for me and wait? And there's no reason right now that you wouldn't do that. I think we can all agree that would produce, if that's done at scale, that would produce some pretty undesirable outcomes. So we're thinking about how do you actually integrate these vehicles in a way that benefit people? How do you actually make sure that they don't have these kinds of negative unintended consequences that we're thinking about? And then I've got one example on the bottom right of this potentially applied to freight. We saw some of this with the drone as an example. Drones are great. They've improved a lot. When you deal with drones, you have to deal with the FAA. Right now, we're seeing robots that actually do delivery of last mile goods by the sidewalk. They were demonstrating these in DC while I was still out there. So they'd have literally a little pizza robot that was rolling around on the sidewalk, bringing your delivery to you. And when they were first rolling these out, they had that human walk behind. Not because the robot was going to make a mistake, but because people were messing with the robot. They would turn it over, kick the thing. So they finally had to have somebody sort of exploring it and teaching people want to know, what is this thing? So freight is going to be a really big deal. We've seen a lot of demonstration models of automated long-haul tractor trailers. That has a big implication for total freight demand, as well as obviously the people who are employed in that sector. And then also last mile, getting it to a person. Forget, get one day, which they can do now. Talking about Amazon Instant, you really get it within the hour and basically for free because there's not really a human. So I'm just putting these out there as a bunch of different possible impacts that we're thinking about. That of course then does give you a bunch of business models and a bunch of business opportunities that can address that. So we're looking for automated vehicles to do a huge number of things. We want them to improve congestion, improve efficiency, improve our land use in our cities and in our rural areas. Improve equity, make sure that we have transportation available to everybody, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, tying together all of these different factors. So for that, there's business opportunities in shared transportation. We've seen if you can get multiple people into the same vehicle, all of your congestion impacts, all of your economic costs, all of your emissions impacts all go down. But that's different from how people are used to traveling. People will generally say, I don't really feel like riding with somebody else in a vehicle. That's often true. Of course, if you asked somebody 5 years ago, would you get into a stranger's car and let them drive you across town for $5? People would have said no, and it turns out that they've largely accepted that. Looking at technologies around things like smart routing, really optimizing how these vehicles work, improving efficiency. Providing transportation as a service. So rather than owning a vehicle, making it very economical and really the most appealing option to just be able to call your phone and call a vehicle similar to how you might use Lyft or Uber now, but at a cost that would be unbelievably cheap and competitive compared to even owning your own private vehicle. And when you do the math of what these costs might look like, because you're sharing this vehicle and all those costs among so many people, that starts to look very plausible. So it's really the shared automated electric future. We call this the 3 revolutions at UC Davis. Shared automated electric, when all these happen together, you tend to get the best things out of the technology. If they don't happen, then you tend to see a lot of these unintended consequences that we're working on. So I'll close with just a little bit of a digression and try to tie this back into Moore's Law and exponential growth. I'm a big believer in the power of exponential growth, just not necessarily always in its ability to save us. So we saw a version of this. This is the classic Moore's Law, looking at the date on the x-axis and the transistor count on a logarithmic scale, so going up very, very quickly exponentially on the y-axis. But what we need to remember about this has definitely been true for integrated circuits, for computers, and that's why computers have seen all of those growth factors that are unprecedented. Not every technology experiences this same growth. And in fact, Moore's Law is very much the exception, not the rule, when you want to talk about technological progress. A lot of technologies we deal with grow maybe exponentially, but with a much slower doubling rate. Or maybe they don't grow exponentially, they grow linearly, they just get a little bit better every year. Or a lot of technologies, once we've kind of developed them and tuned them up, they don't seem to get much better at all. And when you look at some technologies over the past, that's tended to be the case. We have 2 good examples where something like Moore's Law has tended to apply. So this is again looking at PV solar panels and battery packs. And both of them have experienced a learning rate. So here we'll look at the learning rate where every time you double production, how much cheaper does that technology get? And for transistors, that's ended up being about 50%. So every time you double production, it cuts in half. And that's a powerful rate, 50%, 50%, 50%. Keeps getting cheaper. No other technology in the history of the world ever has had that kind of learning rate. It's really the most extraordinary thing. Solar and batteries both done pretty well with about 24% and 21% learning rate. So that means every time they double, they tend to get 20% or so cheaper. That's very fast compared to other technology, and that's why they've gotten so much better in the last 10 years, because we've really gotten onto that growth portion of the curve. Other technologies don't necessarily behave this way. But I do think Moore's Law and all the sorts of powerful technologies that we just heard about still give us reason for optimism. Once you can figure out ways to apply the growth we've seen in computing to those other industries, like biology, like energy, like automotive industry, outside of the AI, the self-driving car aspect of it. If you can find a way to use that artificial intelligence, use that machine learning, use that computing power to improve things, use it for forecasting, use it for modeling, maybe we can leverage that, get some secondary benefits out of it. We can't just wait around for technology to improve on its own. We're going to have to do a lot of that ourselves. So I'll close with a plug for an event way out in 2018, and I'll try to get the information sent around to everybody, called Meeting of the Minds. So if this isn't, has anybody heard of this organization, Meeting of the Minds? Okay, good, a few hands. So they're an organization that brings together the information technology community and the city's communities, looking at how to do really things like we're hoping to see here in Sacramento, like we've already started to see with the Urban Technology Lab, of bringing technology to benefit people in their lives, in their communities. They do have an annual summit. I was out there in Cleveland last month. Really exciting. Got to see a lot of awesome technology out there being deployed. And we're very excited to say that UC Davis is working with them, along with the city of Sacramento, to bring Meeting of the Minds to Sacramento in 2018. So in November 2018, we'll host that summit here. I'm bringing this up now. I know that's a year out. I can't plan even a month out. But I'm bringing this up now because we're already actively looking for cool projects to highlight at this event. We're looking for enormously cool pilots to go showcase. I got to see Cleveland's bus rapid transit system. If you want to get me to Georgetown for another hour, ask me about bus rapid transit, and I'll talk your ear off. And there was, I think, 17 other very cool projects in Cleveland that they showcased. So we're really looking. We're going to have a lot of very cool, very innovative people in Sacramento, and we want to really show off what our region has to offer. So you're welcome to track me down and talk about that. And about anything else, you know where to find me. I'm just down the road in Davis most of the time, and always love an excuse to come down to Sacramento. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you, Austin. Really fun to hear about how some of these technologies will be intersecting with our cities. And as I was sitting there thinking about this game that my kids and I play on the way to school, they often say, "Mom, was the TV that you had, was that color?" And I'm like, "Yeah, it's fun." And then we start thinking about, I say to them, "Well, do you think you'll have TVs when your kids are around? Will you have a TV? What will that look like?" We have this game where we play, what does the future look like? And as I'm sitting here listening to these guys today, I'm thinking about, I hope that you're imagining, what does Sacramento look like? What does our city look like in the future? And what are we going to do to shape that? And how are we going to integrate this stuff? And so with that, this is the guy with all the answers right here. The Chief Innovation Officer for the City of Sacramento. Please welcome Louis Stewart.
Take the mic because I always have height trouble with mics, so we'll go. Louis Stewart, Chief Innovation Officer for the City of Sacramento as of May of this year. Moved over from the state for the past 7 years. I did innovation and entrepreneurship at the state level. Got to see some phenomenal stuff in all kinds of different industries across the state. But because we were with the governor's office, we had global eyes looking at Sacramento, looking at LA, looking at what everybody was doing. One of the programs that I ran at the state, you heard Monique open up with, was about the Innovation Hub program. So it's regional innovation clusters across the state. There's 14 of them currently. At the height, there were 16. They span from San Diego up to Redding, and Sacramento is one of those designated iHubs for the state. Now, the challenge with a statewide program is if you only have one need running across up and down the state, it's hard to get a bunch of people in a room to actually talk about building an ecosystem. So it's been awesome for me to be at the city level, because now I can be super focused on what that ecosystem actually looks like, who's actually involved with it, how do we help each other build the what's next for Sacramento. But one of the things that came into Sacramento understanding is that Sacramento has a perception problem externally, but also internally. What can we do to build the next great city, to build the next great region? And sat down with the mayor right before I started, and he started talking about Sacramento. He wanted to develop this living laboratory, this destination city, a place where community was involved. So what I did was work with the team and give it a name. Sacramento Urban Technology Lab. If you look at the acronym, it's subtle. I didn't hit anybody. And mostly because that's important to me, because I think as we frame conversations about Sacramento being a technology lab, being the next great place where innovators and entrepreneurs can thrive and succeed, it's not something that we need to go proclaim. It's something that we need to just be and step into. One of the biggest things that I heard about Sacramento is that it's a government town. They can't get anything done, yada, yada, yada. Honestly, this is probably one of the best times for Sacramento, because we actually have government that actually wants to do. We have leadership in place that actually wants to get stuff done. And it's kind of incumbent on all of us to start projecting what they want to see, what we need help with, what we need to get done, whether it be programs, whether it be policies, whether it be partnerships, whatever it is. let's start collectively thinking about what that looks like. Let's start working with Sac State, that's doing some phenomenal stuff. Let's start working with UC Davis, University of Phoenix. Let's start working with SMUD. Let's start working with all these entities that we have in and around Sacramento to start talking about Sacramento in a completely different way. So there's only 3 of us on the team at the mayor's office, so it can't just be the 3 of us. So I'm looking at all of you in the audience because I need you guys' help. You guys probably need our help. But ultimately, this can't be done by 3 people. It can't just be Victor Patton, putting articles in the Sacramento Business Journal. It needs to be, you guys need to be feeding him stories now, telling him, what's good about Sacramento so he can actually start getting the word out. It can't, Spud's doing some incredible stuff with innovation. You got Yancy's here, Jim's here. Start tapping into SMUD. They're thinking very innovatively around energy in Sacramento. Let's figure out partnerships there. Sac State, President Nelson just talked about the $6 million. Hey, let's figure out how to support Sac State. So in Sacramento, they are the university as we try to attract other universities to Sacramento to build that urban core that we keep talking about. Skip through some stuff in slides, eye test, talk about the mayor's vision. But at the state level, the IHUB program was the triple helix. Government, industry, academia working together to build and promote innovation ecosystems and regions. Like I said, it's super hard. You hear a lot of people talking about Georgia Tech and what Chancellor May did out in Georgia. If you actually listen to the story, it took 20 years to build Tech Square. It wasn't an overnight thing. So we want to bring something like that to Sacramento. Well, we collectively as a community need to build a foundation for something like that to actually take off. So we have all the components. We have all the parties that need to take part in this. But if we don't start collectively telling the story about Sacramento, it's going to be super hard for the GSECs of the world to attract the businesses that we keep talking about that we want. But then we also have to make sure that you all here in the room and the people out in the community feel like they're included in what's happening next in Sacramento. And so the Sacramento Urban Technology Lab is really how do we create an ecosystem that lays the foundation for the what's next of the city so that we can actually all grow together. Make sure that we're not doing just tech for tech's sake, make sure that we can tell a different story than you're a big company, please come save Sacramento. Because if we get Amazon, that changes Sacramento forever. That's not us building it. That's them imposing what Amazon is on Sacramento, which I don't know if that's good or bad. But 50,000 people over X number of years, that completely reshapes what Sacramento is, will be forever. Any city that it goes to, right? So if we start building the foundation, when those big companies start looking for an ecosystem that's vibrant, that's ready to do some stuff, let's go ahead and all of us start telling people what Sacramento is. What's the next great thing that's happening here? So when we were thinking about what Sacramento is, we started looking at what universities are doing, what Sacramento's historically known for, what do we want to plant the stake in the ground and say that we are, so that the community can start helping shape and tell people what Sacramento is about. Sacramento is now known as the farm to fork capital of the world. Austin is known as the live music capital of the world. All these other cities have proclaimed something. Oddly enough, we can be any of these things because we have this expertise in and around the city. And also, it's part of the what's next. So subtly, if we start going into this direction, all of a sudden people will start talking about Sacramento as an urban technology lab. Oh, and by the way, we're doing autonomous vehicle stuff with AUTOS, the Autonomous Transportation Open Standard. Oh, we have all this clean tech and sustainability stuff that's actually happening here. Oddly enough, if we just turn our head left a little bit and focus on life science, we could probably be 3 to 5 in the state in life science, which is the #1 industry in the state. So there's all these different segments where we can actually just step into and be. Workforce development may not seem like it should be a vertical, but if we don't talk about it as part of this conversation and start developing programs to support what happens if the predicted 36 to 50% automation displacement starts happening, if we don't set up the support programs around that, we fall right in line with everybody else. So why not Sacramento start setting some standards, since we have alignment, federal, state, local, to actually set up supportive programs to actually help the community actually be. This may sound like a bunch of fluff, I get that. But when I sit on panels with San Jose, when I sit on panels in Austin, when I sit And I start talking about developing use cases around some of these things that actually talk about how community is engaged. The response from the audience is completely different. I'll give you guys an example. Down in Verge a couple months ago, sitting next to the Me of San Jose, we were talking about autonomous cars. She described what San Jose is doing with autonomous cars. Tech for tech. Let's get them tested. Let's get them on the road. Let's whatever. I described what Sacramento is doing with use cases. We're working with the healthcare systems. We're working with the autonomous car companies. We're working with the rideshare companies to actually help moms and babies in the perinatal cycle get into their appointments. So you have less no-shows, you have so on and so forth. I explained that, Mitsubishi raised their hand. Hey, we understand what Lewis is doing. He's trying to increase adoption. He's trying to gain some understanding, build trust with the user. San Jose, we have no idea what you're doing. So if we just speak about it differently and get people engaged in a different way, we can actually step into this very well and very easily. We just need your help coming up with partnership ideas, coming up with use cases. We need to know what you guys are working on in order for us to keep building this collectively as a community. Like I said, it can't just be myself, Ash, and Aubrey. It can't just be the mayor. It can't just be the city manager's team. It really is going to take all of you to look at your neighbors, talk to them, get out into the community and talk about what's next, what's Aptology doing. Do you know everybody here? Oh, good. That's good. That's good. But there's a whole lot of energy around Sacramento right now, and we need to know. We need to start telling people what we are, what we can do, what's next. A little bit of description around the triple helix government, academia, industry. You see Warwick University, technically not going to be in Sacramento, but I'm super excited to work with them because they're in cyberspace, they're in cybersecurity, and they're working on autonomous cars. So can that add to our conversation around autos? Absolutely. So let's bring them to the conversation. University of the Pacific is looking at doing some stuff in Sacramento. And Sac City, we need to support our local university. Rails is one of the programs that the city set up. It's $1 million grant program that we have that many cities don't have. They don't have granting programs to accelerate in innovation and leadership. Many of the grantees are actually here. I make some noise, it's fine. I want to thank Laura and Jeff from Startup Sac for helping to put this on. I give them a hand. They approached me with the idea of doing this because it's I can have a bunch of one-off meetings. That's easy. My first 3 months I had 217 meetings, and that's cool. But the reality is kind of what's next. So if I get more of you guys together talking about it, and then you guys leave here talking about and inspiring and moving things forward, that's a whole lot faster than me having one-off meetings at City Hall or coming to your sites and whatever else, and hang out with Monique and talk about the item stuff. But how do we tie back into the state programs? How do we support Level 5 downtown, 7th and J? How do we support that? How do we support Obra? How do we support everything that's here? Show up to the events. Show up and see what they're doing. Go talk about it. Go spread the message that Sacramento is. Not Sacramento's going to be. Not, oh, we can't. Sacramento is. We have a different energy. I don't even know what else to say. We just did the Creative Economy Pilot Project. We had $7.5 million worth of requests for $500,000 worth of grant funding. So there's huge energy and wanting to, the different areas of the city wanting to tell their story through art. The Sacramento Urban Technology Lab is the city. It's not a space. It's not a laboratory per se. And everybody looked at it crazy when I first started pitching it. Well, Lewis, I don't understand. If we can't go there, you're in it. You are part of it. It is you. I don't know what's next. Oh, there you go. That's what I challenge you guys with. Go tell people. Start talking about it. Start tweeting about stuff. Start posting stuff on Facebook about what's actually happening. Start building an echo chamber for Sacramento to put Sacramento on the map. And do it subtly. Thank you. My bad. More information at innovatesac.org. You'll find a little bit about each of the verticals on there. You'll also find the Rails second round guidelines that are up for public comment, so please comment. And you'll also see a little button that says suggest partnerships. The city's open to conversations. We just, we won't probably be able to do all the partnerships and projects, but if we don't know about them, we can't convene, we can't do what we need to do. So, thank you.
Well, you guys made it. We're at the end, and I just want to once again acknowledge Laura and Jeff on with me, with the City of Sacramento. Thank you for coming. And anything else you want to say before we're done? Okay, and the room is still available, so continue to make those connections and find out what other people are working on. Yeah. Thank you.